Jos bygeg alla helga kindir, meriog minni, mögu hentala. Hel kvöld och hel kvällsinir, hel natt och nifte, röjde magom lite dagar sinningar gavet sittjundum sikker. Hade aarde hade avsinniga hälsjaden funnit och boll. Mall och man vet givet också mer om tvåmal liknelsen med den lever. Brandy Brennons brunninär, funni kväkista funni. Mother of mal, ne, verre at maudikude en till latska of dull. Flame is quickened by flame. A man from another man may become wise, but may remain ignorant from conceit. Truth, like the skies above and beyond us all, gods of our peoples and lands, may we spend this time together in friendship with you and with one another, and use it to the common good with profit and with pleasure. Now, if I may, I'd just like to say a couple of words to introduce the topic and to set the way for Ellen to talk at greater length. Caesar in the Bello Gallico says that the Druids believed that their religion forbade them to commit their teaching to writing, and that in order to attain the status as a Druid, which many aspired to, or perhaps their parents did, pupils had to memorize a great number of verses, which might take as long as 20 years. Today in India, I think it can take a similar period of time to become a Vedic priest. So one might assume that when the Druids were put to death, most notably in their spiritual home of Anglesey by the Romans as part of their military campaign of subjugation, which targeted the Druids, since, as we said earlier, they were secular as well as sacerdotal leaders. And this purely oral tradition was irrevocably destroyed. One is forced to contemplate the loss of a corpus of scripture that is of the order of the Vedas in size. One of the few things we know about the Celtic religion is that the Druids believed in the immortality of the soul and metempsychosis, that we would perhaps now call reincarnation. All the Greek and Roman authors agree on this point. There are about 200 names of deities identified, mainly from finds of archaeologists, but only about 20 that occur more than once. Maybe this is a definite characteristic that the religion was very particular, or perhaps the Celts inherited the names of deities from previous cultures. But it stands in contrast to the Norse or Germanic tradition, which is much more compact with fewer named deities. Another contrast with the Norse dispensation seems to be the fact that, relatively speaking, the Celts measured time more by the moon than by the sun. Leaving aside the prehistoric religions that are now present only in monuments such as Stonehenge, the two traditions that have been practiced in the British Isles, where we can speak of named deities, the Celtic and the Germanic or Norse, seem thus, I think, providentially complementary in relation to the 2 points I've mentioned. The Celtic seemed to be more particular in its sense of divinity, and the Norse Germanic was much more general. And in relation to time, the Celtic was lunar, the Germanic, Norse, solar. So I think that augurs very well for some future coalescence of the two traditions, perhaps. I don't know. Who knows? Let nature take its course. Very pleased to welcome Ellen. you've written so many books, which I would recommend anyone to check out on the on your website. So now the floor is yours, please. Welcome.
And how much time do you want me to hold forth here? How many minutes?
How much? Oh, about half an hour. I mean, you know, depend. You know, whatever you feel. You know.
Okay, because I was going to talk first, just give an overview. You asked me to speak about what is Celtic Reconstructionism. So I have 9 principles of Celtic spirituality, and then if there was time, I was going to go into a little bit into some of our specific magical practices, because I thought that might be of interest.
Yeah, maybe. I think you did say you maybe talk about herbal defenses against the virus. Maybe that might be quite interesting.
Oh wow. Okay.
Oh, you know, don't worry. I mean, anything you say is you know, please go ahead.
All right. So 9 principles of Celtic spirituality. And if anybody has a question, rather than typing it in the chat, please just raise your hand and ask, because I don't want to keep looking at the chat, you know. But so as far as I'm aware, we actually have around 400 deity names.
Oh, well, thank you for
More than
correcting me.
200. But a lot of times it's the same deity, but in a different area. So Bridget and Lou, for example, are the most popular pan-Celtic deities, and they're found everywhere. Gaul, you know, the British Isles, you have Brigantia, you know, Lou, Lugus, Chlu, you know, it just, so some of those names are the same deity in different places. So as far as deities, every river is a goddess. So it's a sacred mother river goddess for the area. So one of the things that we ask our members to do is to identify the sacred mother river goddess of their bioregion where they happen to live, so that they can make offerings there. There are goddesses of sacred springs, which are usually more nymph-like. There's, you know, land goddesses. It's all female, and that drives some people crazy, but the rivers are female, the land is female. The sun, like Sunna, you guys have Sunna, right? The sun is also female. It's all female. So people say, well, goodness, you know, where's the male in all this? And so the role of the masculine within all of that is to serve and protect. Serve and protect. Okay, not control. Some people like to say, oh, control, you know, no, serve and protect. So the second big principle is connection with ancestors and land spirits and the She. They all sort of dwell in the same realm. So our cosmology is, and this is different from, we don't call in 4 directions the way Wicca does, or the way some of the Wiccan inspired Druid groups do it. We do not do that. We have a vertical orientation, which I think is closer to what you guys do. So you have the ancestors and the She, the fairy realm, which is underground. Hell, I think you call it, right? H-E-L, hell.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I mean,
For us,
she's the goddess that gives her name to a region.
To Hela, yeah. So we see water. The realm under the ground is water. And actually, scientifically, that's absolutely true. But they say now there's probably as much water under the ground as there is above ground on this planet. But so if we want to make offerings to the ancestors or to the She, to the fairies, we put offerings in water. And this is why artists will throw their first bronze casting into water. People still throw coins into fountains for this reason. You know, it's a very old thing, because water carries the offering down. So if you want to take it down, you send it to water. If you want to send it up to the sky realm, you put it in fire, and fire takes it up. So in common with Hindu rituals and I'm pretty sure, I guess Norse rituals, but I'm not entirely sure, but Indo-European tradition in general, but specifically Hindu, Celtic, you must have a fire so you can send things up, and you must have water. And we like to do our ceremonies outside. We like to do them with living water. So that would be a stream or a lake or a pond or the ocean. If you can't do that, if you're indoors, and I literally have only done ceremony maybe twice in over 30 years indoors, we just don't do that. You have a cauldron and you put the offerings into a cauldron of water, but then somebody has to carry that cauldron with the offerings to living water. So otherwise you're not doing it, right? And then of course in the middle, we have the nature spirits and you know, the animals and the people and the plants and the trees, and it's all sacred. The trees are sacred. You know, this is very similar to Native American thinking. You know, the rocks have spirit, the trees have spirit, the herbs have spirit, the animals, it's all alive. You know, so those, we think vertically. So those are the three realms. If we think in terms of directions, we do have 5 directions, and this is a little different again from Wicca. This is not Wicca, or as many as 12. There's the 12 winds and 5 sacred directions. So the 5 directions, you have north, which is the realm of fire, and the eagle and battle, that's in the north. So if the wind is coming from the north, you know that that means a fight is coming, right? We have salmon in the east, and east is, you could say earth, but it's about abundance and food and clothing and gold and wealth and good, you know, all good things, honey, mead, all that is in the east. In the south, which you could say is water, we have music and poetry and the sow. Okay, the east is the salmon. Excuse me, my cat. The east is the salmon. The south is the sow, because the sow roots deep into the ground, into the dark, to bring up inspiration like poetry and music. And then in the west, you have the stag, and that you could say that's the direction of air, because it's about learning, history keeping, genealogy, all those things. And in the center, you have the great mare of sovereignty, which is the land itself. So if you want to center yourself, you invoke the mare of sovereignty, you stand in the center. On New Year's Eve.
Did you say the mare? The mare?
Mare.
Oh,
Yes,
mare is in the female horse.
correct.
Right, yeah, not the mayor of a town. Right, okay, yeah.
No, no. That again is an Indo-European thing. In Vedic times, they had a stallion. It's really interesting. It changed from a stallion to a mare when it got to the Celtic religion. But in Vedic times, it was a white male stallion. And when the king was inaugurated for 1 year, people would follow this stallion. It was allowed to go wherever it wanted, and it was accompanied by a goat. And then it was sacrificed, and that was the Vedic tradition. In the Celtic tradition, it's a female mare. And back in the old days, the king had ritual sex or possibly real sex, we don't know, with a mare. And then the mare was sacrificed, and the meat was cooked. And then the king had to eat the meat or get into the cauldron with the mare, the stew of the mare, to literally become one with the land. And so you eat some of the mare and you take the mare into you and you bathe in it and you become one with the land. So it's a white mare. And anyway, how did I get on that? Okay, so.
Can I ask, is there any, what's the sort of source for such a ritual, given the fact that, you know, sources is an issue really?
Well, there's a great book that I recommend called Celtic Heritage by Rees and Rees. They are 2 Welsh brothers, R-E-E-S. And that will give you a really good sense of the directions and the ties to the Vedic tradition, the Hindu tradition.
But in relation to that particular issue,
it's talked about in there.
Okay.
I believe it's talked about in there. You can look it up. This is well known. This is nothing hidden.
No.
It's the Ashrameda, and gosh, I think it's in a lot of old Sanskrit literature. There's been some references in the Rig Veda, but I think it's probably more discussed in the Brahmanyas and maybe even the epics.
You mean the eating of a mare in a cauldron?
No, that's the Celtic
tradition. Yes, that was what I was asking about.
Yeah, you can read about that. I mean, that's not, if you Google ancient Celtic kingship ritual, I'm sure it'll come up. It's not.
Sorry, please go on. Sorry.
Yeah, that's nothing esoteric. Okay, so before a ceremony, we like to make offerings. We always make offerings to the land spirits, to the fairies, or we call them the She. And we try to have an altar. I like to have an altar in the house and an altar outside somewhere, to develop a relationship. And we also have a personal relationship with deities. Usually we pick one or two that we are particularly called by, that we make offerings to. And again, it's a family relationship. We honor them, we feed them, they help us. That's kind of how we look at it. So the third principle is poetry. The highest form of druid is the File, which is the poet, the sacred poet. It's not blank verse. You have to memorize.
Bard, would that be the bard?
It's the highest type of bard. There are 3 types of bards, and there is a book. It's called the Re-constructionism, the Laws of the Poets, where you can read the training of the bards. And bard is just one type of druid. You could be a historian, you could be a lawyer, you could be a judge, you could be an herbalist, you could be a bard. I mean, there are many different kinds of druids. And druids they probably knew a little bit about all the disciplines, but they were a specialist of one or maybe one or two. But to be a File, you not only had to know all the stories, probably about 500 stories, you also had to know many different alphabets, different oghams, tree ogham, river ogham, bird ogham, pig ogham, cow ogham. I mean, it goes on and on. And that's so that the druids could communicate with each other. People thought the druids were crazy or, incomprehensible when they were just speaking in ogham. So they could communicate with each other. They could say, the little yellow pig crossed the river Shannon. And the yellow pig is a letter of the alphabet, and the river Shannon is another letter of the alphabet, and they could communicate like that. But if you look at the Re-constructionism, the File is not only a fully trained poet, and we actually have the exercises of what they did, like covering their head, going into a dark space, putting a big stone on their belly, and staying there until they could incubate a poem. We have a couple of different exercises that we know that they did. But once you became a File, you had the tongue that could not lie. And that meant that when you spoke, what came out of your mouth was prophecy. And that's why they are the highest trained type of druid poet. So then in Celtic Reconstructionism, obviously we have a great reverence for the past. For example, in Wicca and modern witchcraft or whatever, there are people that are very creative, and I have nothing against it. They're extremely creative, and they come up with new rituals and costumes and poetry and all kinds of stuff, and they like to invent a new way of doing things. And that is not what we're interested in. We get most excited when we find a new translation of something really old. And the reason that my group, the Tuha Nadara, which is the tribe of the oak, the reason we focus on the Irish material is because that is the oldest material that we have, and that's what we really like. What that means is when the monks started writing things down, and the reason they did that was because they had to convert the tribes, and if you didn't know the stories and you didn't know the gods and you didn't know the laws and you didn't know all that stuff, people wouldn't think that you were a learned person and they wouldn't take you seriously. So the monks had to learn some of the Druid stories and material so they could go convert the tribes and be taken seriously. So they started writing things down, which we are very grateful for, even though they often have little glosses, Christian glosses in there that we have to unravel. But 6th and 7th century writings, which are older than, well, maybe Taliesin in the British tradition is of that age. But it's certainly older than the Mabinogion. So we like to focus, the corpus of Irish material is the largest ancient corpus that we have.
Do you use Irish in ceremonies much or not?
If we can, I'm still learning. I mean, I'm barely a beginner, in Irish. It's hard. I mean, we would like to, ideally, yes. When you speak to the gods in their own language, as I'm sure you know, because you did it at the beginning of this, when you speak to the gods in their own language, it's a whole different experience, than just speaking to them in English.
But I'm always very worried whenever I come across an Irish word, because the pronunciation is always quite different from how it is written. It's always
right, exactly. Yeah, it's hard. It's very hard. I blame the monk who created the rules. He did a horrible job.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we like to collect the sacred stories, obviously, and we categorize them by seasons or by deities, or there are stories that are appropriate to be told at Lunasa. There are different stories that are appropriate at Imbolc or Samhain. We like to incorporate those. The next principle is our cosmology, which I told you we have the 3 realms: land, sea, and sky. But sea is underground, water is underground. Ancestors, nature, spirits, gods, making offerings to fire, water, and trees. Making offering to trees is the realm of land. We already talked about that. There are certain numbers that are very important, like the number 3, the number 9, which is 3 threes. In the Indo-European tradition, the high gods are triple. So Bridget it's not maiden, mother, crone. There is no maiden, mother, crone. Again, that's Wicca. It's Bridget, Bridget, and Bridget, triple Bridget, all the same age, right? The Morrigan is 3 figures, all the same age, 3 sisters. Lou was born of triplets, all the same age. That's how you know you're dealing with the high god, when the number 3 comes in. And again, it's the 3 worlds. The number 9.
That's very interesting. I've not really heard that idea, but 2 of the names of Odin are third and triple in Old Norse, and that's an interesting thing. So thank you for that. Sorry.
Yeah, and then the number 9, Odin hung on the tree for 9 days. Yeah, 9 just means a long time or a big amount. So if you're beyond the 9th wave, that means you're way out to sea. Or the whole 9 yards means it's a great kilt, Okay, so the number 9. Okay, inclusiveness. This is important. There is no Celtic race. Every time I hear this, every time I see it on the internet, I have to explain it all over again, and I must have done it like 500 times. There's no such thing as Celtic blood. Drives me crazy. Anybody could be taken into a tribe by marriage or adoption. What Celtic means is language. There's Celtic languages, right? Lifestyle, culture, religion, deities. It has nothing to do with race. It has nothing to do with blood. Okay. And everything from the west coast of Gaul or France all the way to the Black Sea was Celtic for 1,000 years. North of there, you had Scandinavia and you had the Norse culture. South of there, you had the Latin culture. Central Europe, and then up into Ireland, of course, and Britain, everything east to the Black Sea was Celtic. And I mean, you can't say I'm Irish, therefore I'm Celtic or whatever. It has nothing. There are many different, it goes all the way down into Turkey. There were Celts in Turkey, Galatia. There were Celts in Iberia, and some people think that Iberia is actually the origin of Celtic culture. That's the new scholarship now. There's Celtic from the West, you know. Anyway, just get that. There's no Celtic blood. Drives me nuts.
Lots of Irish people, for instance, do think of themselves like that, don't they? I mean, you must have met lots of people who self-identify as Celts, so it's a common thought. Anyway,
and they don't speak Irish, they speak English, and they worship a Christian God who comes from the Middle East, and then they say, I'm a Celt. I was like, what? You know, like,
yeah, by your definition, that they wouldn't be, would they? By your definition,
no, they're Anglo.
Yeah.
Anglo. Okay, so respect for women. This is a whole big topic. There were obviously female deities. There were female judges. There were female lawyers. There were plenty of female healers. I have a paper that's floating around on the internet. You can go to academia.edu and other places. It's called Female Druids. You know, for some reason, it's the Victorian idea of the druid as the old man with the beard dressed in white. It's like God sitting in the sky is an old man with a beard, you know, same thing. But there were just, druids came from druid families, and they were usually trained by their parents. So they had a mother, like Brahmins, they were exactly like Brahmins. So you had the mother who was a druid who knew all the rituals, and you had the father who's a druid and he knew all the rituals, and they trained the kids. The ones who weren't trained by their parents went to Druid college, but there were just as many female druids as male druids. And there were just as many, well, I don't know if there were just as many, but there were certainly female warriors. Cuchulainn, for example, was trained by Skaha, who was a female warrior who had her own martial arts school. Finn McCool was trained by a female druid and a female warrior. So he was really exceptional. He was both a druid and a warrior. The other thing is that homosexuality was normal. In the warrior poetry, we have warriors declaring their love for each other and sleeping with each other and making calf eyes at each other and things like that. But women had a very high, I mean, almost as powerful as men. For some reason in cult, I think it's just because men are stronger and they have more muscles. But men did predominate, but women had a lot more rights, and rights of inheritance, rights of divorce. The freest women in the world at that time were in the north, Iceland, Scandinavia. Those women were really free, but the Celtic women were almost equal to men. We certainly had powerful queens. So women could inherit, they could divorce. We lost all that when the missionaries came in. So they came in with the Roman religion, and they brought the Roman idea of womanhood, which was based on the Greek idea of womanhood. And we're still trying to recover what we lost. as far as I can tell. We're still not there yet. Okay, so another principle that we admire is complexity. If you think about Celtic knotwork, Celtic dance, where your feet have to move in patterns, you don't just stomp across the floor, you know, your feet have to make knotwork on the floor. If you think about the Book of Kells, all the interweaving and the intricate, the elaborate, but within that is repetition. And the repetition lets you know that it's conscious and deliberate. It's very intricate, but it's very controlled. Think of river dance, you know, it's precision, you know, that's an aspect. So that comes into the artwork. You also see it in law, you see it in myth, you see it in poetry. The poetry, you had very precise rhyme schemes that you had to memorize. And within those very complicated and precise rhyme schemes, you had to convey a transcendent message. So that's the ultimate art. Wordplay, puns, veiled references, riddles, metaphors, all those things were valued and are valued. Personal responsibility and honor. So boasting is actually considered positive, which is the opposite of the Anglo-Saxon view of things. If you're at a dinner and you boast, especially if you boast over your cup of mead, and I'm sure you guys do the same thing at a feast, but that's a big thing and it's positive. Personal accomplishments are important. Showing that you're exceptional, that you have skill, that you've accomplished something. And then every person has an honor price. And if you read the Brehon laws, we have, I don't know if we have all of the laws, but we have several books of the laws. There's a good book by Fergus Kelly about, what's it called? Guide to Early Irish Law. It's on my shelf here. And then there's another one called Early Irish Farming. Those two will give you a really good sense of the laws, but every person has an honor price. And there was no idea of the individual. You actually represented a family. So if you did something wrong, your entire, it's called a derfin, which is 4 generations of your family. The entire derfin was responsible for paying the fine. And depending on who you were, the fine was adjusted, and also depending on the severity of the injury. And so if you have an injury, say, where there's as much blood as would fit into the shell of a hazelnut, that's one level of fine. If you had an injury where there was as much blood as would fit into an eggshell, that's a different level of fine. But you know, again, it's very precise, and they try to think of every possible eventuality. You know, what happens if your chicken wanders into your neighbor's garden and scratches up the herbs? What happens if your sheep eats somebody's half of their spinach field or something? What happens
in your community? Do you try to put these laws into practice as far as is possible in the modern world, or?
Well, our community is pretty small, but restorative justice is the basic principle. And restorative justice is actually, I don't know about what's happening in Britain, but in the United States, there are communities that are trying to take this up. And this is a very old idea. And it's, rather than being punitive in focus, it's restorative. So the perpetrator and the victim should be gotten together, and then the perpetrator should do something to help the victim, you know, and that heals the community. So if there are any lawyers in the list, any lawyers on this chat?
I don't think so. I don't think so, no.
Because if they read the Brehon laws, I think they could learn something. Okay, what else? Oh, okay. So do you want me to stop, or do you want me to go into Druid magic?
I think, do you have any recommendations for things we can take?
Who led us to an incredible economy, energy independence, reduction of taxes for millions, regulatory relief for businesses,
Morgana,
peace in the Middle East, and stronger border security. This action will only serve to further offend the 75 million people who voted for President.
Yeah, I don't know what that was. Would it? I think before throwing it open to general questions, could you perhaps say something about anything that you would recommend to take in relation to protecting us against the virus, or strengthening the immune system? Maybe that might be interesting.
Oh, okay. Let me just, I actually have quite a bit of information on that. Excuse me, I think I had it last January. They weren't talking about the symptoms or very much at that time, but I'm pretty sure I had it, and I still cough. I'm still coughing.
Yeah,
but,
it can be long to get better, can't it? Yeah, it can be a long time.
Well, because I didn't know anything, I just treated it like a flu, like a regular flu. And what I usually do for flu, and I recommend that you write this down because it really does work, a combination of elderberry and echinacea, but you have to take it every 2 hours. Okay, so like a tablespoon of combination elderberry and echinacea tincture every 2 hours in hot water or herbal tea. So there was a rumor going around, which was later disproven, that people who took elderberry, that they would have the cytokine storm in their chest, that it would make it worse. But that was disproven. And I got through it. So, but I have a nice formula. I actually have 2 formulas that I will share with you. So write this down. The first formula comes from the 1918 flu. And there was a doctor named Burns Lingard, Lingard, who came up with this. He treated over 200 patients and he didn't lose anybody. They all survived, which was kind of unheard of in those days. So he used, and this is just for flu, and of course COVID, you know, flu is a coronavirus, right? So COVID is related. 4 parts yarrow or akalea. And if you get the tinctures and put them together, it's really easy. You just put it all together in one bottle and you're all set. So 4 parts yarrow, 3 parts mint, 2 parts elderflower. It's the flower, not the berry, okay? 2 parts angelica root, and 1 part bone set, which is eupatorium. Now, this is a flu where there's a fever because the elderflower and the mint are designed to bring, it opens up the pores, makes you sweat, brings down a fever. So that's for flu with a fever. Then I have another formula, and this is more for pneumonia. Okay, so again, what I suggest, if you want to use this, just get the tinctures. If you put them together in a bottle, it's very simple. And if you're really sick, again, you have to take it every 2 hours. All right, 4 parts yarrow, 3 parts mint, mentha, 2 parts elderflower, again, the flower, not the berry, 2 parts poplar bud, 2 parts asclepias, which is butterfly root, 2 parts angelica root, 1 part eupatorium bone set. If there's a lot of phlegm or catarrh, you can add Stillingia. And another nice herb that you could use, if you were doing just the elderberry and echinacea, you could also add lemon balm. And you could add lemon balm to any of these formulas, actually. It is antiviral and it's very calming and soothing, you know, so it's always a nice thing to have in there.
Oh, well, so thanks very much. I mean, there's lots of those names I'm not familiar with, but I'm sure shops that sell herbal things
Oh,
would,
they'll know. Yeah, these are common. These are not exotic.
not
These
that
are
exotic. They
common.
sound quite exotic and interesting, but that's only because I'm rather ignorant of these things. But that sounds wonderful. Well, thanks very much for that. Matt, perhaps we could open it to some general questions. Adam, please. Yeah, you've got your hand up. Please go ahead.
Hi there, thanks, Alan. That was very interesting. I'm quite interested in this idea that homosexuality was accepted in common practice. Now, I always thought that that was a slander from the Romans, who wanted to depict the Celts as a debauched, licentious people. What reference is the where's the reference to homosexuality being quite open?
Okay, I don't know how common it was, but it's in the poetry. So you find it in the poetry where you have warriors saying, you know, my little calf with your beautiful eyes, I want to sleep with you, I want to warm myself, or something. You know, two warriors talking to each other.
Which poet? What poem? I mean, which
Oh,
word?
you would ask.
Oh, okay. No, you don't. No, sorry. I'm just
It's not
curious.
something that I've focused on particularly, but you can find it. Again, Google is a wonderful tool.
My experience of most of the warrior societies, and the Celts were very much a warrior society, you know, liking to decapitate people and display the heads as signs of their prowess, were not particularly well disposed to homosexuality. Certainly in the north, it was a really, you know, it was very significant insult to imply that of someone. And but so I would imagine they'd be quite similar, really, the Vikings and the Celts in that respect. So no doubt it was something that occurred sporadically, as it always has done in history. But to say it's representative is maybe, I don't know, maybe another.
Yeah, I don't think it's representative. No. But it happened and it was accepted. And to have the Romans putting anybody down is ludicrous, because, you know, they like to talk about the barbarian Celts, and at the same time they had the circuses going on where they were maiming and torturing people.
Yeah,
and animals. So
yes, exactly. One never knows how much weight to give to the Roman accounts of the human sacrifices and prognostication by means of putting a knife in someone and seeing how they quiver as to what's going to happen in the future. One doesn't know what to make of that. But
yeah, there's no it's not in the poetry. There's nothing about that. There's no evidence of the Wicker Man. It looks like Roman propaganda.
Apart from Caesar, yeah, we don't. Yeah, it's difficult to estimate. But please, other people.
Yeah.
Anyone else like to?
If I could, I've been.
Alan?
Yeah, Alan, go ahead.
Yeah, I fully agree with actually what Adam has said, and said yourself. I think there is such a thing as victor's justice, and that's probably applied to the Romans just as much. And let's face it, homosexuality is the easiest smear in the world to accuse anybody of. But my question for Adam, and first of all, many thanks for a most fascinating talk. You did say earlier that there was no written records that the Celtic priesthood left behind. You're quoting a lot of things, a lot of poems. You know, how do these two things relate?
Yeah, as I said, the monks wrote the stuff down. They had to.
This is Christian monks, is it?
Yes, Christian monks. And that's what we have. Before that, it was oral.
Right.
And then the monks had to appear like they were intelligent and educated people. Otherwise, the tribes wouldn't take them seriously.
But, Ellen, I think I'm right in assuming that the extent of the material that may have taken 20 years to memorize, we don't have that at all. And we have a few particles, as it were. It's, I mean, this was an enormous corpus, and we just have a few pieces dropped from the table almost.
Well, a lot hasn't been translated yet. That's the frustrating part. A lot of it is still out there in the Gaelic. There's a lot more than you might think.
Really?
We have books and books of stories. We have the stories. Cross and Slover, Ancient Irish Tales is one of our required books. And those are all ancient Irish tales.
These are folkloric tales rather than religious teachings, maybe.
They're myths. I wouldn't call them folkloric tales. I would call them sacred myths, because they talk about the gods, and these are the ones that we read out loud or recite during a ceremony. All
right. So, I mean, even though they were put down by Christians, you think they have still a lot of religious truth in them?
Well, yeah, they had to, because the people knew the stories. And if the crazy monk arrived saying, hey, you know, I'm smarter than your druid, and I can prove it, and, you know, but they didn't know the stories.
Okay, yeah, no,
they wouldn't get very far.
Thank you. AJ, please go ahead. Unmute yourself, please, because we can't hear you. Thank you.
Sorry, my phone was ringing off the hook, and I didn't want to bother everybody. So I would just like to respectfully disagree with the categorical statement that you made, that there's no such thing as Celtic blood, or Celt is not in the blood, or whatever. I mean, literally that's true. There's nothing in the blood worth talking about, literally speaking. But to say that there's no genetic correlates of Celtic heritage, I think is just flat out incorrect. I understand how many societies, for valid reasons, like the Native Americans, want to include people or exclude people from their group based upon tribal membership, which is conferred in various ways, etc. And I understand that. And it sounds like you're trying to do the same thing for Celtic heritage. However, molecular genetic studies have been done that have strongly associated a certain haplogroup, R1b, very closely to the former and present range of peoples that have been almost universally identified as Celtic peoples. Okay? Now, you may want to define it socially now, but what most people have meant by Celt throughout the ages has not been what you're saying. It was not defined by some kind of social convention. There was a very strong genetic component to that, you know? If you want more information, I can paste in the chat box a couple of places where you can find out more about this R1b haplogroup. One is a Wikipedia article, another is something called Upedia for like European. So you can research it yourself. I understand the social need that some people have to distinguish this from a genetic legacy. And maybe they're not identical things, then you're using the word in different ways. But to state categorically that it has nothing to do with biology, I think is just wrong. I'm sorry. I have to respectfully disagree.
Okay, I think that's a very dangerous kind of philosophy, but would you consider the Turks to be, are they R? How about the Basques? Are they R? I mean,
R1 is a more specific thing. You can read about it. Yes, there are.
Yeah, no, believe me, I know. I happen to be an R myself, but parts of Turkey were Celtic. They're not R. The Basques and the Irish, I believe, are genetically almost identical, but they're not the same culture. So the genetics and the culture have nothing to do with that.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I mean, they're not connected.
The Irish are not identical genetically at all. They're very distinguishable.
No, the Irish and the Basques are the two close. They're very close genetically, if you look at them. But the Basques are not even Indo-European. The Basque language is not Indo-European. It's a completely different culture. So, but their genetic, that's because the genetics go back to the Paleolithic, you know?
But people do their own. You will see that there is some truth to what I'm saying if you check up on these haplogroups.
I think this is, I mean, it's very good that the point is raised by AJ. This is clearly it's quite a big issue and really requires more, a technical and scientific evidence to really establish it. But let's move on to another.
Michael?
I could maybe have some valuable insight in this discussion, because I'm thinking that there maybe isn't a contradiction, because you said that you talked about the possibility of adoption and marriage. Mm-hmm. And we can always think of epigenetics in the sense that people that accepted the culture, either or someone adopted the person because there was some kind of genetic cohesion, you know, in the sense that they felt that there was some kind of connection. That's why they adopted the person. Or if the person adopted the culture, the gene could be activated by adopting the culture. So it could not be there. It could still mean the same thing, you know, that there is no contradiction in this. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
I don't think that genes and culture are related.
I think the studies that were done, maybe 10 years ago, by the Italian gentleman, Sforza, AJ, I'm sure you. Yeah, that's right. And I think the general principle was established there that is perhaps quite natural, that people who belong to communities that speak related languages are to that extent related genetically, as a general principle, that, for instance, Norwegians and Swedes are more related than Norwegians and Italians and Portuguese are more related. And there is a degree of proportionality there. And therefore, people that come from communities that are traditionally Celtic language speaking communities, you know, there is likely to be something there, I think. So,
well, I live in the United States where everybody speaks English. Are you saying that we're genetically attracted to each other and we're genetically homogenous? I mean,
within the United States, obviously, you have to go within the communities that make up the United States. You know, English people that come from English speaking descent, obviously Italian communities, Germans, and so forth.
We all speak English. We
yes,
are
I know we
Anglo
speak
English
now, but the world speaks English, so that's not that's not really what the work that was done some years ago was attempting to look at. It was in the same way that lots of people use bicycles. Michael, please jump in.
I'm sure there has to be some correlation between language and genetics, but the Q Celts, and Ellen help me, is it the Q Celts and the P Celts?
P Celts, yeah, P Celts and Q Celts.
They were known to be genetically mixed. It was more of a cultural identity rather than linguistic identity.
Right.
And so as that's, I think, been established as a genetic thing. But all right, let's end this one. I want to just ask as a review. I mean, I got lost on the 9 principles. So I have deities, ancestors, poetry, cosmology, and I guess respect for women must be one.
Yeah.
And complexity, but I'm missing 3.
Okay, I have deities, ancestors and land spirits, poetry, reverence for the past, Celtic cosmology, inclusiveness. We don't judge people according to race, respect for women, appreciation of the complex and the intricate, and personal responsibility and honor.
Sorry. Ellen, the one thing which all the ancient writers talking about the Druids were agreed upon in relation to their beliefs was that they believed in the immortality of the soul, and it was also mentioned what we would call reincarnation. Does that figure in your particular path? I mean, do you believe in reincarnation?
Yes.
Okay, so that is a strong a point of view. I mean, do you have a similar view to the one found in Hindu Dharma that we're attempting to move towards, through each sort of birth, we're trying to purify ourselves towards moving towards an ultimate state of some sort.
We don't dwell on that so much, although we do read the Upanishads. We think about that. We think about being justice and truth are two very important principles. That's why the justice of the king, the truth of the king was the most important thing. We have a book, the Testament of Moran, Oidacht Moran, which it's an entire kingship ritual, which we actually have in book form, where the Druid is advising the new king on how to be a king. And the most important thing is it's the same word. Justice and truth are the same word. I forget what your question was.
I read this book. So yeah, Adam, yeah. Everyone's got precedence over me in this.
No, Steve, please, you the host, if you could, put me on your list. Carry on with what you were going to say.
I'm just going to say I read this book by Anne Ross, who's a Gaelic speaker. I'm sure you're probably familiar with it, the Druids in preparation for this. And one of the things she mentioned, I think about 3 times in this book, as a precept about how to live, were 3 things: worship the gods, tell the truth, be manly. And that struck me. I thought that was quite reasonable. Any comments?
Yeah, that's actually a rewriting of an old triad. The be manly part is strengthen the arm. That's what it said, strengthen the arm originally.
Okay. That's
and that was the warriors ethos. Warriors had different deities than kings did, and craftsmen had different deities. And people had, depending on what your specialty was, you would have a different deity. So they had kind of like guilds. The warrior guild had their deities, and the druids had their deities, and so
on. Any other questions, please? Michael from Cologne, you have your hand up. Please
yes,
hold.
I do. I'm not good enough with this technology to see where you could put your hand up technically. Yes. My question is, you talked about kings and other functions in the Celtic society, and at the same time, I understood it to mean, from your view, that there's almost anybody could join Celtic society. There was no sort of tribal or racial ethnic precondition. But how then does one become a king or a farmer? How does the class society function? How is one a warrior or a king? A king seems to me, normally in most societies, not in all, but in most societies, is a matter of lineage, which presupposes a family history, which is a kind of ethnic group. Or is it just a matter that kings were elected? How does that work out?
It's both, actually. There's a caste system, and it's identical to the caste system that you find in India. So you have the Druids are the equivalent of Brahmins, and they come from a hereditary family, and that's why I said they're usually trained by their parents. You have the warriors, which are equivalent to the Kshatriya in Hindu society. Then you have the farmers and producers, and then you have the slaves. People could move up and down the social ladder. It was fluid. And there was no primogeniture, so it wasn't this idea that your son got to be the king. It wasn't like that. So there were, the kings came from the warrior class. They had to be ritually elevated to become Nemed or sacred, which is, the Druids were the Nemed or sacred class. The king had to go through a whole ritual, which we have, the Oidacht Moran, or the Testament of Moran. You can read the ritual where the Druid is telling the king, you got to do this in order to be a king. He's instructing him. They had councils, tribal councils, where the kings were elected. But usually they were elected from certain families, that were warrior families, powerful warrior families. So they would be elected. They could also be fired. If they screwed up, they were fired. If a farmer, say you were born into the farmer producer class, a farmer happened to become extremely wealthy. Suppose he was a cow farmer and he found himself with 600 cows, and all of a sudden he's like really rich because cows were money, cows were wealth. That farmer could not become Nemed, and he couldn't move up the ladder, but his grandson could. So that's in
Was
the
that depended on who the grandson's mother was?
I'm sorry?
Was that dependent on who the grandson's mother was, coming from another?
No. I mean, it had to do with wealth. If the grandfather was extremely wealthy, the grandfather himself could not move up the social ladder, but his grandson could. That's in the Brehon laws. And I thought about that, and I thought, why grandson? And that's because the grandson is young enough that he was actually raised as a noble.
All right.
Whereas the grandfather wasn't. I'm sorry.
Another thing to answer Michael's thing is that you had different tribes. So you had, at one point, the king of the Tuatha Dé was Fomorian. So you had these, it was a battle, but then he became, and it wasn't always a battle, I think. Sometimes it happened for other reasons, but you could have different kings that were not of the original tribe, and they had to put up with that for a period of time. And so, and also if the king was wounded, he had to step aside for being
right. If
king
the king was blemished, yeah, there are a lot of reasons why a king could be fired. If a king did something bad, and the Druids wrote a satire about the king, and they started spreading that satire around, then the king was considered blemished. Or if he was wounded, he was blemished. Or if his skin broke out in pox, he was blemished. You couldn't be blemished and be a king. And then another thing is, if you were, say you were born into the warrior class, and say a young man who was born into the warrior class kept going to the tribe across the hill and attacking the young ladies over there. And then the tribe across the hill would start demanding her honor price, and then it gets more and more expensive for the family until the family doesn't want to put up with it anymore. Then they take that young man and they put him in a boat, a coracle, with no oars, and they send him out beyond the ninth wave, which is a long way out, and they leave him there. And then the idea is that the gods will send the boat wherever it needs to go. So the boat will float on the ocean until he lands, and wherever he lands, he now is a slave. He has no status whatsoever, and he's lost all of his privilege and status, and he has to start all over again, and probably taking care of pigs or something like that. So you could move up or down the ladder, and the same thing was true actually in India until the 9th century, when the Muslim invasions came in. And when they were invaded, they hardened their society, and they hardened the caste levels. Before that, they were fluid. And the Celts, really, I think of the old Celtic religion as the Western end of what became Hinduism. You have, it's the same religion, Eastern and Western ends.
Yeah, I think that's a very valuable insight. There doesn't seem to be any really significant differences, I think. Yeah, that's an interesting point. Are you personally then in favour of being ruled by a king or a monarch?
To be truthful, I have actually said that. Because, well, when I look at Queen Elizabeth, I get quite jealous because there's so much chaos going on, especially now here. And we're all just exhausted, we're just worn out by this whole thing. It's just, Every 4 years, we have to go through the nonsense, and now it's just worse than ever. But it would be so relaxing. But the problem is you have to have a sane and intelligent monarch, you know. So the Celts took care of that. If you weren't sane and intelligent, they would fire you, you know. If the land suffered, if there was bad weather, bad crops, sickness, disease, if there was a pandemic, the king would have been fired immediately.
Who knows? I mean, history goes on its own course, and maybe monarchy is the way forward. I don't know. I think that'll be interesting to see. Please, those who've not. Oh, Adam, you've got your hand up. Please go ahead. Go ahead.
Hi there. Just a bit more of a contemporary question. If somebody wanted to start out, a spiritual seeker wanted to start out on the Druid path, what one of the current organisations would you send them to?
Well, that's not fair. I have my own group. I would say, come to us. I think you have to try different ones. You know, I mean, I had somebody just this morning who told me they were in one group and they didn't like it, and could they please come to my group? And I said, well, okay, you know, you can try it, but I would tell people to look at all of them and then try to see which one fits, you know.
What do you think are the three most important texts that we have now, the reading of which would be of spiritual benefit to those of us perhaps that haven't read these works?
Well, if you're just going to read one book, I think Celtic Heritage by Rees and Rees.
I mean, the source material. I mean, the
source material.
Mabinogion. Do you think that is the?
No, we don't have anything to do with that.
Because it's from the Welsh side of things.
And that's 14th century. That's way too young for us. Boy. There's no one book. There's no one book. I mean, we have a list of basic books on our website, tribeoftheoak.com. You could, I mean, if you really are interested in the Celtic culture, which again stretched all the way from Scotland, Britain, Ireland, France, Spain, all the way east to the Black Sea, including Turkey. And, you know, I mean, it was a big, many people, many cultures, many races. I hate that word, but Celtic Heritage would be number one. And then I'm just looking at my shelf. You got to understand the Brehon laws. So there's a Guide to Early Irish Law by Kelly. I like Pagan Celtic Britain by Anne Ross, which is an older book, but it's still, it's really good because she gives a lot of the archaeological evidence and the images of the deities and place names associated with deities. And I like that book a lot.
I tell you why I asked this question, because our Karaji, who was a former guest on this at a Moot, who's written a book called the Tama Manifesto, gave a list of works that he thought represented the Dharmic point of view, particularly in European traditions as well as the Indic. And the two sort of works from the Celtic tradition he listed were the Mabinogion and I think the Dun Cow, the story of the cattle raid, I think relating to Cuchulainn and the Ulster people. But you would disagree. You wouldn't put those two works as being, you know, the work that, you know, the most important ones.
Well, I think the British Druids like to look at the Mabinogion, but it's just not something that particularly interests me. I mean, there's so many stories. As I mentioned, there's Cross and Slover, Ancient Irish Tales. It's a big, thick book of the stories, and you can read the stories about Cuchulainn and Finn McCool and all the, you know, Lugh and all those stories. They're all in that book.
Oh, okay. I was saying, I mean, your website's got that sort of list, so that will be, people can just type your name and go.
I mean, I'm looking at my shelf. I must have 100 books there. So it's, I mean, for the Scottish material, the Carmina Gadelica is really nice.
Yeah.
And Oh, what else? I don't,
Oh, okay. No, that's fine. Mikhail's got his hand up. I'll perhaps press on. Thanks, Ellen. Yeah. Please go ahead.
So I would just like to say one remark and one question. One is regarding, I really like what you said, that sort of that the inclusion to the culture is not determined by blood, because I think that's part of the Abrahamic tradition. That's how I at least see it. And it's not part of the Indo-European tradition, in my eyes at least. And even with the, I really like the concept. I don't know if you're familiar with Evola's idea of he talks about he distinguishes between two types of race. He says race of spirit and race of blood, where he says that race of spirit is the right type of spirit, the noble spirit, the spirit of nobleness, let's say in this way. So I think it's important to distinguish between these two things. And then I have a question. So this was my remark. Then my question is that you talked about the feminine and the holiness, let's say the holiness of the feminine. In the holiness of the feminine, Evola talks about two types of possible holiness of the feminine, where one is the motherhood, in the sense of the worship of the Holy Mother. And the second one is he calls, which is maybe a word that has a bit of negative connotation, but I will explain it. He talks about holy prostitution in the sense of priestesses of Aphrodite or priestesses of fertility that sort of had some kind of complex sexual rituals and things related to this matter, which were not really, that were not holy in the sense of motherhood, but they were still holy in the sense of femininity. Was there anything like that present in the Druidic culture of this?
No, because every goddess was supposed to be sexual. That was, it doesn't matter. You have triple mothers are very important. The matres are found all over, but every divine female was assumed to be sexual. There was no some special fluffy Aphrodite figure running around. No.
Oh,
if you
okay,
were a goddess, yeah, part of being a goddess was being extremely sexual. That was part of it, because you
yeah,
were,
but in the sense of motherhood, especially in the sense of motherhood, no?
no, that's just another aspect of the divine feminine. But there were the divine mothers, the matres. They were specifically divine mothers. But you had warrior goddesses. You know, there are many different kinds of goddesses, and they're all assumed to be highly sexual. And the motherhood is just, other than the matres, the motherhood is an aspect of the goddess, but it's not a big deal. You know, it's not the overriding thing, unless it's the matres. Yeah. Because you have nymph goddesses, you have young goddesses, young triple goddesses. You have Bridget is a goddess primarily known as a goddess of skill. She's a goddess who inspires the poets. She's a master poet. She's the master of smithcraft. She's a master of healing. We don't primarily think of her as a mother, you know, although she was a mother. She did have a son, but that's just one little tiny aspect of who she was. The most important thing about her is her skills. She's a goddess of skill.
Would someone?
There are no virgin goddesses like with Artemis and Hestia and Athena, I guess, for that matter. We don't have that with the Celts, do we?
No.
Yeah.
Okay. Would anyone who hasn't asked a question like to put? Anthony, please go ahead.
Thanks, Deb. Ellen, there's been a history of woad being seen as a psychoactive substance that has some hallucinogenic effects. That seems to have been disproven. So that leaves me wondering whether you've any evidence of hallucinogenic substance use amongst the Celtic tribes or tradition. Is there a history of that, such as there was in ancient Egypt, or is that really not a part of their rituals, but only a part of their sort of the healing powers, the more medicinal aspect of the Druidic hierarchy?
Well, there was a type of Druid who was a specialist in intoxicating and hallucinogenic drinks. That was their specialty. I'm not sure that we have evidence exactly what they were using. But I think we can assume it was probably psilocybin, something like that. The Druids were shamans, and they didn't wear white robes, except Pliny said they wore white when gathering mistletoe, and mistletoe has white berries, and it looks like that was just for that one ceremony. If you read Pagan Celtic Britain by Anne Ross, she talks about the evidence for what they were actually wearing, which was leather capes with feathers on them, which is a typical shamanic outfit, you know. So it seems pretty certain that they were taking mushrooms, something like that.
Well, okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, thanks very much. Mick, do you have any questions? Anything? No.
I want to add that we do have one ritual.
Not really, mate, no.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Ellen. Sorry, Ellen, what did you say?
I was just going to say we have an actual ritual where the way they kind of got high or hallucinated, if you want to use that term, they ate a little bit of raw flesh.
All right, charming.
Like cat.
Oh dear, right, yes.
And then they would, you know, get a vision or something.
Right.
And also being sewn up in a bull's
Thank you, Adam. Thank you.
What was that? I missed that.
Adam was just.
We had a demonstration. It wasn't very nice. Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, but they did voyage. They did have Imrama, you know, voyages, but it usually involved being you slaughter a bull, you take the hide, you wrap the Druid in the hide, which is kind of like going back to a womb. You sew up the hide, you leave the Druid there, and the Druid has a vision, and then you let him out.
Good. Krista, Ben, Moria, Morgana, Miteshji, any
No, nothing from me, Stead. I'm okay for now, but I do enjoy this lecture.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I see Mr. Harvey twitching to the point of. Sorry.
Mind, just to go back to what you were saying about the virtues of a monarchist system. This might be a little bit off topic, but as Ellen is an American, I saw a very good drama series a couple of years ago about John Adams, second president, who I knew very little about prior to that, and it seemed to suggest not only that he is very, very pro-British, but also that he was in favour of the American presidency being of more of a monarchist or type. I don't know whether you know anything more about John Adams. As I say, he seemed, a fascinating personality to me.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
Well, in those days, half the country was monarchist. I mean, that's what the revolution was about, was to decide, are we going to be a monarchy, or are we going to,
John Adams was on the revolutionary side.
Yeah, are we going to, yeah, but half the country were Tories, whatever. You know, are we going to honor the British king, or are we going to have our own king, or are we going to be more like what, I think the French Revolution came later, but they were inspired by us, actually.
Anyway, I was very fascinated about John
Yeah,
Adams.
no, it's
I must read
it
more
is.
about him one day. And of course, his son, John Quincy Adams, little piece of totally irrelevant historical information. John Quincy Adams was one of only 2 American presidents to be married in Britain.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. We'll
Totally irrelevant, I know.
yeah, the next pub quiz I'm find myself in. So that
Well,
If they asked you who the other one was, it was Teddy Roosevelt.
Well, I think kings and
Don't
queens.
ask me how he got married.
Kings and queens are fine. They're brilliant as long as you can fire them. You have to have a mechanism to be able to fire them, and that's how the ancient
We
Celts.
found out how to do that in 1649.
Is that the hand of Karina? Yes, please go ahead. Nice to see you.
A little note, herbalism is one of my big passions, and Adam and I had COVID at the beginning of the year. Not the beginning of the year, sorry, in April. We went to Madrid, picked it up in Madrid during the Women's Day parade. Not that we were part of it, our hotel was above it. I was very ill, and as far as I'm concerned, it was astragalus, the herb astragalus, which has been medically researched alongside with echinacea, which has been proved to be 10 times stronger than echinacea. So if anyone, God forbid, does go down with the dreaded lurgy, which for most people just gives them a headache, which is all that Adam had, if you even know you've got it, I would highly recommend astragalus. I was taking half a teaspoon of the powdered stuff on average about every 5 hours with 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C and zinc. And on a personal level, that's what worked for me, along with loads of sunshine. Luckily, it was hot and sunny in that April, because a few times I thought, that's it, I'm dying. I'm actually on my way out. And that's what actually, along with a plug-in nebulizer, did save me. So it's certainly worth looking up for anyone that doesn't know about astragalus. It's, as I said, it's like echinacea, but 10 times stronger. So it's certainly worth.
The name sounds really, really potent. Astragalus. Yeah, it sounds great. Yeah, so that
Well, I have to say something. It's a Chinese herb. Okay.
Oh, well, that's not so good, is it? Maybe. Okay,
well,
sorry.
Okay, hang on. Let me finish.
Yeah.
If you're going to get it, make sure that the roots are yellow, not white, because the problem with a Chinese herb is that they spray them and irradiate them, but it has to be yellow. Often they'll try to sell you white roots, which don't have the power. But the thing is, if you are a person who cannot sweat, and there are people who don't sweat, you cannot use it. Because it actually closes up the pores.
Has anyone met anyone who can't sweat? That sounds an extraordinary thing.
Did Prince Andrew claim he couldn't sweat?
Who was that?
Prince Andrew, didn't he claim he couldn't sweat?
So there are people who I've met 2 in my life who told me they couldn't sweat. Yeah.
We won't go into let's not go into that. Maybe.
No.
Adam, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, a little sidebar conversation going back to Adams's concept of monarchy. There was a move shortly after the Declaration of Independence to make Washington a king. Some people say it wasn't actually against the concept of monarchy some Americans were fighting. It was a concept of being ruled by King George and the British monarchy.
I think that series I saw brought that out.
Yeah, and one reason why Washington is revered is because he said no. And he stepped down peacefully, unlike what's happening right now as we speak.
Heather, do you have any questions? You're muted.
There. Yeah, no, I'm fine, thanks. Very informative. No, I've learned a lot there. So lots to read, lots to look up. So it's a wonderful introduction.
Oh, by the way, yeah, thanks for helping us out on Sunday with the right meaning of incontinent. Yeah, that was really important.
I happen to have a study book, so I must have read it at some point in the past.
That was very helpful.
That's what it said. So there you go.
Krista, please. Sorry, yeah.
Yes, I don't know whether we really got into magic at all, but there is a revival of, you know, magic in the world at the moment, and various people, especially now, a revival, and that came, you know, is it Stephen Skinner that works on the Goetia, Keys of Solomon, etc. And with this revival of magic, I also see a revival of magic in the paganism, you know, etc. And I want to just understand whether there's a revival of magic in Druidism as well, whether magic becomes far more part of ritual and working with magic to obtain better health or anything else. Maybe you can just talk quickly about that.
We have less of a focus on that. Magic would be something that we would do if we had a very, very severe need. Our major focus is on giving thanks and making offerings. That's our main focus, because our assumption is that if we have a strong family relationship with deity, with a particular deity or deities, that we help them and they help us. Okay. That's our, you know, in our typical ceremony, we're making offerings to fire, offerings to water, offerings to trees, offerings to deity, depending who it is, what season it is. The magical part, if we, I mean, I've certainly done that. But again, it's very serious and you have to really think it through very carefully to make, you know, to try to anticipate any repercussions, you know, like it's just not something, I mean, we think of it as a really big deal when you do that. Whereas I think witchcraft and Wicca, from what I've seen, they do it, they like to do it all the time, it seems like.
They do.
And that's not how we think.
Not focus. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's a good point. Yeah, I think perhaps we should be sort of thinking about winding things down, because you've given of your time, you know, freely and generously, and it's very, very, very good of you. I wondered, yeah, anyone with any questions? Ben, Miteshji, Morgana, Terry, who. Yeah, it looks as if you're outside, lit by the moon or something. I can just about make out someone's there, but it's just such a range of images, which is nice. Or if no one's got any further questions, I mean, thanks for being such being so generous with your time and being such a good-natured guest. To deal with some issues which are quite controversial, and I thank you for that.
Can I just mention one book if you're interested? Yeah, if you're interested in modern Druid groups, because there's so many. This book, A Legacy of Druids, which I happen to have written. But what I did was I went to Britain and I interviewed the founders of the major Druid groups there, and also some Canadians and American founders of Druid groups, and there are many different Druid groups, and they have different focuses. It's called The Legacy of Druids. It's from Moon Books, and it just gives you an overview of the whole spectrum.
Okay, that's correct. Just finally, Miteshji has just put a question into chat, and what's your view of Ayurveda, the Indian system of medicine?
Oh, I think it's a great system, but it's a whole other system. It's not something that I've focused on. I mean, in fact, I've been an herbalist for over 30 years, and I like my students. Right now I don't have students because of COVID, but normally I tell my students, learn what's in your neighborhood. I think it's more important to know the herbs that grow in your area. One problem with the Indian herbs or the Chinese herbs is they're irradiated or they're sprayed with pesticides, you know, to get across the border. And we have wonderful herbs that grow right in the hedgerow, you know, right in the backyard. And I mean, I've had really crazy situations where I was invited to speak in California, for example, and to teach herbalism, and those are completely different plants. I'm on the East Coast, and I didn't know the herbs in California. So what I did was I looked at, I asked them what the Native American tribe was in their area. They said it was the Pomo. So I looked up what herbs the Pomo had used for thousands of years. And I came up with some formulas, and I went to California and I was teaching them about what the ancient Pomo were doing. They said, oh, we have those herbs in our backyard. And I said, yeah, that's the whole idea, you know. So I taught them. Now they're making salves and using the herbs that are in their own backyard based on what the Pomo were doing thousands of years ago. So that's what I urge people to do, really, is to just learn what's in your own backyard. And
well, yes, thank you. I mean, that's quite a good general precept, isn't it? About most subjects, learn what's in one's own backyard. Really, it's very good. Yeah, I think that's quite wise. Now, do you have some words to sort of end the moot, you know, in a prayerful way, and then I can blow out the candle? That might be nice. So yeah, please go ahead.
okay, this is a prayer to Bridget, asking her to protect the people, to bring peace and protect the people. Avrija bandia banachta, abeni na teura tenche trenu, isen herja, isen heura, isen huan. No don kosen in natuata. Apologies if there are any Gaelic speakers that I offended.
Sigur os, breather os. Thank you very much for being such a gracious guest. Thanks everyone for contributing good questions and some funny points as well, which is good. So it's made it an educative and entertaining evening, I think. And it's nice to have people that are here for the first time, and I hope that, you know, please come again. With that, yeah, enjoy the rest of the evening, and maybe I'll see some people on Sunday, which will be at 4 o'clock, to hear Richard Rugeley, who should be a very entertaining guest. So good night, everyone.
Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Stead.
Thanks,
Bye.
bye-bye.
Thank you, Ellen.
Bye.
Yes, fine.